So as everyone knows, I'm here to talk about bipolar disorder and hope and healing through art therapy. And the first thing I wanted to start with was, now this is something from the American Art Therapy Association, and this is a brief definition of what art therapy is. Now, if you want to go ahead and take a minute to read it, I was going to talk a little bit because I generally don't like it when people read slides directly to me, so as I'm just going to be discussing a little bit about what I'm doing, as you can go ahead and read it unless someone would prefer that I read it to you. Any preferences? Okay. So what I wanted to say about art therapy was that, well, it does not cure bipolar disorder, and there have been times when my clients have needed to go on to a higher level of care. Regardless, I believe I have a what I call strength-based orientation. So I'm looking for, as much as people are coming to see me because they're having difficulty, they're in pain, they're struggling, is that I believe that everyone has inherent strengths, and that's what I'm looking to pull for and focus on and use problem solving. And that promotes, hopefully will promote higher levels of functioning. And I'm always considering where that individual is on their journey. And I do believe that there's hope and the possibility of healing through art therapy, and that's why I'm here today. So is everyone done reading that slide? Okay.
Yes.
And if you have any questions as we go along, I'll leave some time at the end for some questions. But if you have any questions or clarification that you need before then please go ahead and let me know. I'll be happy to answer questions. So this is one of my strong beliefs, and a lot of people feel that they are not creative. They're not artists, they're not creative, but I believe that everyone is creative, and it's just a question of what form it takes. And it can be, it can be in different kinds of art forms. I offer a lot of different kinds of art materials, and that people do not need to be artists in order to participate in art therapy. Sometimes people talk about that it's just about the process and not the product. For some people, they would like a particular kind of product. I work with people across the board with that. Some people come to me with very strong artistic backgrounds, and some people come with no artistic background. The idea is that this is a way to express yourself and hopefully bring things from the unconscious to the conscious and be able to look at it from there and help. And sometimes move quicker than you would in talk therapy, because oftentimes, I'm not against talk therapy at all in any way, shape, or form. But oftentimes in talk therapy, there can be ways where you're much more defended about what you say and about what you share with the person who's helping you. So these are strength boxes. Oftentimes I start with clients, not just with boxes, but with the idea of or strength or safety boxes. It can be either one. I use boxes in all different ways, but I like the idea of setting the tone of safety in all different kinds of ways in my office, because safety is really a big issue. A lot of times people don't feel safe, and they're afraid about what they're doing, and particularly when they're making art, if they don't feel comfortable with it, or with some of the traumas and issues that have occurred with, say, in this case with bipolar disorder. This is an 8-year-old boy who created this. So once again, that not everything is all happy, but let's start with a place of feeling safe and feeling comfortable. Whether it be, these happen to be boxes. I also use drawings too. And then these are some healing stones that I make. It's always interesting to me when I'm doing this kind of presentation, because these are actually about this big. And of course on the screen they seem a whole lot larger than that. People come up with their own words and or images. So those are on the top are the front, some different words, and on the back are some images that people have glued onto it. And so those can be either carried in a pocket, they can be put into a book, into a box. people use them in a lot of different ways in order to remind themselves of their strengths and things that are positive in their life, and to keep that focus going as they're struggling with, in this case, we're talking about bipolar disorder. I found this on Weathering the Storm by bpbipolar.com, and I thought it was very apt metaphor for the intersection of what people with bipolar disorder, what they experience, and which way you're going to go. Is it, and for a lot of people, it's both. It's sometimes hope and sometimes it's despair. And I wanted to start with a client. He came to me looking for help, for treatment, and he told me that, and this one unfortunately does not show as well as I'd like, he said that art therapy really helped him, and he wanted me to share some of his journey and his ups and downs and highs and lows with this audience tonight, including being able to use his first name. Oftentimes we don't use names, but he felt it was important, and a lot of times I find with my clients is that they like at least their first name to be said either as acknowledgement, or that they feel like if they can be helpful to somebody with their journey, then they want to do that. So this is Everett, and we're going to look at some of his artwork. Now, it's hard to tell from this slide, but there's color underneath, and this is, but then it's all covered with black. And just a note about, and it's called Feeling Bad. Just a note about color and the use of color in art therapy. Oftentimes, people assume that certain colors mean certain things, including some art therapists are very definite about, like, say, black means depression or red means anger. And I don't find that to be the case, and I don't adhere by that. In this particular case, yes, it is about the black covering up the color in his life. So it really is about that. And he came to art therapy treatment initially due to the suicide of his best friend, and the challenges and the depth of his own grief, and he had his own suicidal thoughts, and he was also self-injuring. He was attending survivors' suicide loss groups and wanted additional help with his depression, which was later diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And much of my work, just a little bit about me, is much of my work has been with people who have lost a loved one to suicide. And I also work extensively with suicide prevention. And I see the connection between suicide and mental health disorders. The statistics say that 90% of people who take their own lives suffer from a mental illness. So it's really, really crucial. And according to the International Bipolar Foundation, 25 to 50% of people with bipolar disorder attempt suicide at least once, and suicide is the leading cause of death in this group. And both bipolar disorder and suicide both have a very high level of stigma associated with it. And one of the things that I was happy to come and do this talk about is that one of the goals, of course, of the International Bipolar Foundation is to work to erase that stigma. And I work to erase that stigma with suicide as well as with bipolar and other mental illnesses. So, on to the next slide. Okay, this is some of his early work. He would draw a line about where he would be with his suicidal ideation. So this is the feeling bad. This is him moving towards, you see that blue line in the middle? And if he crossed the line, that he could go over and the edge and actually take his own life. I didn't choose to show them tonight, but he did many graphic descriptions of how and graphic visual descriptions of how he was going to kill himself. But there's some positives in this. He says he's teetering, he's on the edge, he please help. I need to see the way out, and some, his difficulties, but he can see a way out. And he talks about some of his difficulties, missing people, finances, all the pressures that he has, internally in his thinking process, in his depression. But this was a way of both, I think, for him to see it as well as to let me know graphically where he was in his process and what we might need to do if we needed to intervene. And then this is another aspect of him. I'm a determined fighter. I'm creative and sensitive to people's needs. I can listen, tap into what is being said, and then encourage. And that truly is a strength of his. He's somebody who has suffered a great deal, both in losses in his life, including suicide of a family member later on in treatment. And one of the things that he has been able to do in the past is to reach out to others and talk to them, encourage them to go to support groups, and that kind of thing. So I would see less of this and more of the upset and the despair and the hopelessness associated with depression. He tends towards the depressive end. He has some hypomanic episodes, which include especially with the irritability, but he tends towards the hopelessness. He has difficulty getting out of bed. He has gained a lot of weight. He has a lot of different issues that part of that's a health issue, but I think it's always important to really emphasize these kinds of things that come through. So since he was self-injuring, one of the things that we've worked on over time is the self-injuring in different ways that you can say externalize it. So this is actually, and I think of a handprint as, it's his handprint. It's kind of like a self-image, but this is a way of marking what's outside of him instead of marking him. He continues to have difficulty. He struggles with self-injury to this day after a number of years, but we work with that, and this is one way that we've worked with that. So this is the struggle here. This called I sing the song of freedom, but he's in a cage, and it's he's trying to get out and sing that song of freedom, and it's a huge challenge. So all of these images so far and what you're going to see, I believe, encourage self-awareness about his disease and his opportunities to discuss his feelings and what options he has to work with them. So this one is about chaos and anger. Is the next one of his beast stomping people. You see the stomp, stop, kaboom, and even though he's doing those and looking at chaos and the anger that he's feeling and how that's coming out, is that he also comes back to the idea of an anti-suicide message. So it says death by suicide, of course, and stop, and that that's both self-directed as well as towards other people who are considering killing themselves. Let's see. Yeah, and some of these will show, although through time he does move, like I said before, he moves from, there's some positives, real positives, and then negatives, ups and downs, but a lot of his work really reflects his predominance of depressive symptoms. This is very disorganized, has a lot of hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and at times the irritable moods. And although most of his work is non-directive, in art therapy there's directive and non-directive, so you ask somebody to make a particular thing, or you use a particular material, or else you just let them use whatever they want to. whether it's the material or whatever subject matter it is. And in this case, though, he was open to, we were back to working on his self-injury about making the marks on the paper rather than on himself. Okay. And this is, well, he tends to do two-dimensional flat pieces. He did some three-dimensional pieces, some modeling clay and some popsicle sticks. Even though I usually ask for somebody's interpretation, I don't remember what he said. I think of this as being, to me, it's like a life raft holding something up and using the modeling, usually the modeling clay. We've also used the modeling clay as a way to, for him to mark using clay tools as a way to externalize that feeling rather than taking it out on himself. And just a note on different kinds of materials, and that different materials will tend to elicit different kinds of emotions. So there's a spectrum. Say it would be, pencils would be on one end, and you'd have, say, paint on the other end, or three-dimensional, you'd have wood, and then you'd have clay, loose clay on the other end. So the looser something is, the more emotionally involved or evocative it's going to be. So even though he didn't use, it's using kind of a combination of the two, he tends towards the using the markers and the pencils and things that are more controlled. And there are times when I might, depending on what's going on with somebody, I might direct them towards a particular material or away from a particular material, depending on what's happening in their process and where they are in the disease. And this is a structure, a fortress that he built at that time. So in this case, say he's using a very structured material, which is the wood, as well as the paint, which is less structured. Okay. And on this, you can't see it, but it says, the top says, my life with a mental illness, and also caged with hope. So even though he's caged, there's a possibility of getting out. And at this point, he had started getting help from other support groups, and also has been had ongoing medication treatment. He had had some changes in his medication over the time that I've worked with him, and has been fairly consistent with his medication, but as oftentimes the case with having this disorder, mostly because of the side effects or people feeling better, that sometimes people decide to stop taking it. And he has gone through a few periods of not taking his medication, but by and large is doing that, and is being followed by some really competent people at this point, which wasn't always the case. And I just wanted to show this. He made numerous images like this, and the way that I looked at them, he oftentimes would not, in this period of time, was not giving titles to his artwork, but and would not really describe it. But I would think about this as you look at all the lines and the colors and the containment aspect of it, trying to contain some of those feelings of, the outburst, the anger, the upset, that he would vacillate between that and the depression. And this is what he called the giant suicide beast. And this was at a time when he was feeling very suicidal and felt that the giant suicide beast might be able to take over. He's since done 3 of them. He did a series. And at one point he was going to name one of his drawings Suicidal Beast number 4, and he said, no, I've done 3. 3's enough. I said, yeah, that's okay. You're going to get something else. But just knowing that that's a piece of what he is working with, and that he is fighting back in a sense in his own way, both by seeking out treatment and being consistent with his treatments, different forms of treatment. and this one's it's a little bit light. It's, this was around the time when his friend killed himself. And I don't know if you can read it over here. It says guilt, and this says I'm sorry. And that's him standing above the gravesite of his friend. And one of the things that he said after he made it was that, because when he sits down, he just starts drawing. There isn't necessarily a plan, there's not a directive on this. It certainly wasn't here, is that it just came out of him. And that's what he said, it just happened. And this is where I see some of the power of the art therapy, is what I mentioned earlier in the talk was about that unconscious piece, because it was around the time of the anniversary, that unconscious piece coming to consciousness, and then we could have a discussion about that and how he felt guilt, and maybe that the guilt was really remorse for maybe what things he hadn't done and wished he had done for his friend. And during this time, he also had some changes in medications, and he believed those changes to be beneficial. And I think to some degree, it is. I can see it in his artwork shifting. And as I said, a lot of his pieces have tended to be not abstract, as you can see from the ones, non-representational. I've shown you a number with words and things in them, but he has been, more recently, he's been titling them, and this one is called Soccer. Say they look like a soccer ball, 2 soccer balls there. You can see that. And that and this next one, called Cream Sundae, where I think he's become, if you look at some of the earlier images, a lot more organized in his work. I see some people shaking their head. Yes. Okay. I'm going to move on to some other images now from some other people, and I just want to say, since he's not here, that I appreciate his dedication to staying alive for all means possible. Any thoughts or questions about this? And like I said, we'll have some time at the end for answering questions, but I didn't know if anyone had any thoughts at this point.
I was curious, when they start drawing, do they have a limit on time? Sorry.
Yeah, generally, there was a time when I was working with him, generally it's an hour. There was a time where I was working with him for an hour and a half, and at a certain point he said he felt he didn't need the hour and a half anymore, that he just needed the hour. And he's also now coming once every other week, which is something we've agreed to, as opposed to, I feel like he's doing well, and he's also, like I said, utilizing other support groups and things to go with it. So, is that?
Yeah, I was just curious because some people take so long to do something, and so how do you encourage them to, we have an hour and you're not, haven't started, and you can, pick what color am I going to do something?
Well, that's an interesting point, and I think what happens a lot is that, well, for one thing, hopefully I'll be seeing somebody again. So if they don't finish it, I have folders and I have shelves and I have places for people to keep things, so it can wait until the next time that they come. Although there are some people that I work with who, as soon as I tell them, say we have 10 minutes left, you think about wrapping it up, all of a sudden more paint comes out, slow down. No, we're wrapping it up, we're not amping it up. So it is, sometimes people are really ready to leave and they're done with their session, but more often than not, when they're making the art, it's hard to stop. And if you've ever made art yourself, which I didn't ask anybody who's an artist in the group, but if you've ever made art yourself, is that sometimes it's extremely difficult to stop. And I taught for many years at UCSD Extension. I was the program coordinator for their art therapy program, and I still teach art therapy there, but not as often. And one of the things I give my students, because part of their learning experience is making art, because you don't ask somebody to do something that you yourself have not done. That's one of my biggest rules, is that you do it yourself and you have the process and then move forward. Is that oftentimes my students would complain to me about how they didn't have enough time to finish. Even when I give them oftentimes more time than you can get in a session. And I'd say, one of the things I'd say is that this gives you a good sense of then how it feels to be on the other end of this. And with you being the client, you being the consumer, and you're being told, you've got to stop, and what that feels like, or how you might pace yourself, or how you might help somebody pace themselves. So, yeah. Thank you. Okay. I just wanted to talk about, I just have a couple of pieces by children. Your permission, because everything that I show, I have to have permission to show. And once again, it's harder to see. This was somebody who was an 8-year-old who was struggling, and this was trying to make something like a happy picture. And even though there's not much in it, there's actually a stem that goes down longer. There's not much in it, but for her, it was the best effort that she could make at showing, at really wanting to feel happier and feel better, and not feel necessarily manic, but more in a stable sense of happy. And I want to show you, this is something that I get a lot with people with children in particular with severe mental illnesses. Can anyone just make a comment about what your reaction is to that, or what you see or think of it?
I see an angel.
Okay.
She's floating.
Floating, yeah.
It
But
looks like it's cutting something in half.
like it's cutting something in half, okay.
There's no body, there's no torso.
Right. And what about the space? How much space is that? Oh, is that image taking up on that paper? Okay. So it's not all about, I mean, it's somewhat, I'm always asking the client, what is this to you? What does this feel like? And I think the concept of the angel did come up, although it was also a self-image, is that of looking at that and maybe how is somebody feeling about themselves, if that's how they draw themselves, is in that both this disjointed, they may not have the skills, and I'm not looking, it's not about criticizing skills, it's looking at, yeah, what might they be doing in it, and the lack of torso, and then, but just then all the empty space around it, no grounding. So those are things that you'd be looking, that I'm looking for in terms of giving me information about how somebody's feeling and what's going on internally with them. It's not about judging the artwork. And then this is a teenager a young teen that I worked with for a long time, who like to build. I don't want to be stereotypic, but the girls build too, but I worked with a lot more boys that like to build. I happen to have access, be very fortunate enough to have access to these scraps of wood like you saw earlier, plus I can get wood cut for me. So what this young man did, this was, he had his cat was missing. And so that lower piece was his upset about, even though it's fairly organized actually, but it's his upset about his missing cat, which, good news, it found the cat. So, didn't want that to be. And then the cat disappeared. It didn't, it came back, or it was found. One of the things I wanted to note about the upper image is that while this is supposed to be a city, an image of a city, and is that if you notice there's the blue over here and the gold. Can people see that? There's glitter glue, and how that's kind of, to me, and I sort of see him. He would become very agitated with his parents and had a very difficult time containing himself, is that there's certain aspects of feeling contained in this, and then there's the glitter glue that's poured all over it. And that's what he wanted to do. And like I said, once again, there's no judgment. It's a question of what is that showing me, and if he's able to discuss it, what is that showing him? I think in his case, he would have told me he just felt like doing it. But what is that showing about where he is in his process, and then how can I support him if he can become more organized, if that's more important, if that's an important aspect. In his case, behavior was a huge aspect. So, wanted to move now to talk about some adult artwork. This is a mandala. How many of you have either heard of or worked with mandalas? So a number of people, okay. Because a lot of people use it not just in a therapeutic context, but either as, use it for meditation, use it for self-soothing. It actually means a concentric energy circle, and people sometimes use it as a symbol of self, like I said, an object of meditation. And in this case, it helped the client to contain a building manic episode through the structured lines. So you'll see, this is actually out of, they've got many mandala coloring books. I don't know if you've seen those that are for adults. And I'm not at all about coloring within the lines, as you might imagine, but there was an attempt made to, this person chose this because they wanted to have more structure. They didn't just want the circle. Because the next one you see, they just are given a circle and then can work within the circle, but that wasn't enough structure. So they wanted something with more structure, and I have many different copies of these. And you can see there's an effort in this organization with the different lines and the colors, but then that afterwards, that sense of I'm not in control with the orange, and how it's, you know, popping outside of lines as well as going over this what had started out to be a relatively organized piece. So for her, this was giving her, as an adult, she had the insight as well as in being able to discuss it with me, that there was something that was developing in her, and that possibly she needed to check on her medications and to be paying more attention to self-care and that sort of thing in order to stay healthy and not move into a more full-blown, she wasn't in a full-blown manic episode, but to not go into one. All right, and this one was one that was given to a different person, and this just had the circle. And what she titled this was called the Red Ring of Fire. And she said that it represented both an attempt to contain her racing thoughts, so that she was moving towards that. You can see the red is fairly contained, but some of those other lines are not, are more scribbled, and so she's making that attempt, realizing that her thoughts are racing. She wants to calm down, she wants to keep healthy, and she's concerned, she has some issues going on in her life, and she's also concerned about her medication. And this is where the medication issue can become a very, very challenging one, because there are certain people, say she identified herself as being an artist, and there are certain people, both children and adults, that feel that when they take their medication, that if it stops them from having manic episodes where they consider themselves to be more creative or more productive, then it's going to take that away from them. And so there's a real concern. Part of this, the question mark was what to do about her medication, because she identified it as an artist and was was quite concerned that it would kind of numb her down enough that she wouldn't have that. And if anybody has ever experienced or been around someone with a manic episode, it isn't always joyful, happy, creative, I'm making the best painting I've ever made. Oftentimes it's grandiose and you're really not. When people come out the other end, you realize you didn't make the best painting you ever made. Is that it's a big concern. And I don't have time to go into this tonight, but wanted to just raise it because there's a webinar on the International Bipolar Foundation site on this topic about people who believe that they're if they cure their mental illness, it will take away their creativity. And there's a book called Touch with Fire by K. Red Philip Jamison, and I'll have that out later. And she does a whole history of different kinds of creative people. So there are artists, there's poets and actors, there's different kinds of creative people, and what she believes their diagnoses are, and how medication either did change or might have changed the course of their, the outcome of their lives. Last time I heard her speak, and I don't know if people are familiar with her work, because she's a doctor who herself has bipolar disorder. She prefers to call it manic depressive disorder, and she's written a number of books, including one about her struggle called An Unquiet Mind, and some other books in addition to that. And when I heard her speak one time, she talked about her struggle with medication, because she felt like, she went back and forth between these periods, but she had a very serious suicide attempt and almost died, and was lucky not to die, and decided at that point that she was going to stay on her medications because she felt like it was a life or death issue. And in talking about medication, since I'm not an MD and I don't prescribe it, I don't advise people per se. I mean, I work with people who I think are excellent. I have excellent people to refer to. But I think it's a very important consideration, and it does show up. It can show up very clearly in the artwork when somebody either might need it or not, or maybe that I need to make an appropriate referral for them to discuss, for someone to discuss their medication, which happened in this case. Okay. Now this one is about, you can see these are torn. This is a collage, which a lot of adults use because they feel more comfortable. For one thing, it's a more controlled. It's a more controlled material, as well as a lot of adults use collage because they don't feel like that their drawing is going to be judged as not being artistic enough. But this was one, as you can see, my life falling apart. There's the bottomless pit, the broken heart, and the tearing up the symbolic, the background pieces are, she really wanted to travel, but due to some of the limitations of her disorder, that she couldn't travel, or that she didn't feel safe. The travel becomes an issue about taking care of yourself and keeping your rhythms the same. I think there's a chapter in your book on traveling, that she felt like in so many ways that her life was really coming apart, and how unhappy she was about that. So this is where you see this is very conscious choice on her part. I'm just saying, this is how bad I feel, and I need to get it out, and I need to show it to you. And then this is a piece that she did, and I couldn't remember exactly how many sessions, probably about 3 or 4 sessions later, where she was doing a lot better. And as you can see, it's kind of hard to see here, but these are people dancing. People dancing around this is the back of a woman, the people dancing around her, everyone's joyful. Now, it's not in shreds anymore, it's a possibility. So a lot of different symbols, the flowers, and how she's now picking up the pieces that before her life, she felt like the pieces were coming apart. And here now she has the opportunity to find some peace, and that the darkness is lifting for her. So you can see, it's just two examples of one person, but how much change there can be in doing the art. Okay. All right. And I wanted to show you a quote by Barbara Kingsolver, High Tide in Tucson, Essays from Now or Never. I don't know if have people heard of that book or read the book? It turns out that I saw this quote, and I went onto Amazon to read a little bit more about it, and it turns out that the High Tide in Tucson is actually a short story of hers about a hermit crab that she accidentally brings back from the Caribbean where she went on vacation, who moves in with her, and I don't know if this is real or not, but this is her story. So, but that she noticed was it would act very depressed and then get very, a lot of movement, and decided that she had a, well, she called manic depressive hermit crab that was living with her. And it was wonderfully written in terms of the understanding, and I didn't know. This one I will say, in my own worst seasons, I've come back from the colorless world, colorless world of despair, by forcing myself to look hard for a long time at a single glorious thing, a flame of red geranium outside my bedroom window, and then another, my daughter in a yellow dress, and another, the perfect outline of a full, dark sphere behind the crescent moon, until I learned to be in love with my life again. And I found that to be, like I said, very moving in terms of that sense of, and I know when I've had issues feeling like the world lacks color, not literally, but it just becomes can become such a sad place to be, but then being inspired, and I've personally been inspired by red geraniums. I love red geraniums. That's part of the reason why I don't feel like red necessarily means anger, because I look at red geraniums and they make me feel really good. So, and I painted a lot of them. So, and they weren't about being angry. But I just thought that part about learning to be in love with my life again, because I think that with the struggle with bipolar disorder and the difficulty of getting the diagnosis and then of living with it and working with it, there's a sense of learning to love your life again. That's so important. And then the last slide was a collage that someone made where they were feeling like they had a heart full of compassion. And I know this is the ending of the talk, but that there was the beginning, the sense of the flower and the opening up and the beginning. And I wanted to end with that on the hope and healing theme. And if people want to get in touch with me, I have my information there as well as in the back, and left myself plenty of time for questions. So